This is the Edge of Excellence, empowering people to shape the future. Let's inspire, innovate, and explore together. Welcome to the Edge of Excellence, the podcast where we explore how leadership, culture, and technology empower businesses to grow and thrive. I'm Jessica Forge, and today we're talking about something that nearly every organization relies on, Microsoft 365, and a risk that often goes unnoticed until something goes wrong. Today's conversation isn't just about technology or security, though. It's also about what happens when teams are empowered to question the status quo and build better ways forward.
Yeah, joining us today is Adam Jones, creator of iuvo Guardian. And he's a progressive IT generalist with over 20 years of experience in IT. I just love Guardian. It's been such an amazing product, and we have the creator of that here. So Adam here he's a principal consultant here with iuvo and has spent decades inside of Microsoft environments, literally inside, watching what's happening, watching the same challenges surface again and again. And instead of accepting the chaos as inevitable, he created a solution. So he's a perfect example of being empowered within the Leadership at the Edge framework. Adam, welcome to the Edge of Excellence.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, Adam, thank you. I'm really excited for you to kind of share more information about Guardian, but also about how Guardian came to be. So I want to start with a question about your experience and ask you why you believe so many organizations think that their Microsoft 365 environment is fine to begin with.
Yeah, sure. I think a lot of it tends to stem from it's a kind of like a set it and forget it kind of trap, right? Like, you configured the tenant maybe 2 years ago. You might have even used 2 years ago's best practices, and things were great. And then, kind of as time goes on, things change under the hood, and you might not necessarily know that's happening, but you're not getting any alerts by default, really. Emails flowing just fine. People are able to log in, no problem. Everything just on the surface seems to be working great. Meanwhile, things are going on under the hood that you might not necessarily realize.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Microsoft does have default security settings, but what assumptions do you think leaders make about these default settings that just are not true?
I think people just assume Microsoft is secure by default. It's a huge company. It's a huge tech company, obviously. They obviously follow their own security best practices. Some people might even believe they sell a lot of security products, right? So some people might even believe they're a security company. But I think, they're just like anybody else. They want to have frictionless adoption, right? Like they want people to come in and be able to use the products right away. And a lot of times that leads to, kind of like a less secure starting point than you might expect. Even if, you go in and you buy like an E5 license, which has all these awesome security features and, tons of cool stuff bundled with it. Not all of that is necessarily on right away when you turn it on in the tenant or when you get that license and you enable it. You got to go set that stuff up. I think a lot of people don't always realize that or realize how much there is that they can do to improve their security, once they have those tools and they're paying all that money for it, right?
And coming from my perspective, that what's cool about Microsoft, when you mentioned the tenant, is just like, like maybe even I have a personal, my family, we have Microsoft 365 for them because but everything looks easy because it's GUI driven, right? And so you don't necessarily see it until you drill down and you do a bunch of clicks and you finally get to those points. And then then again, do I go back and look at those settings? Probably not, but so this is
they've moved them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I swear it was there last week.
So it's really easy for somebody with low skill to start off with it and maybe make some assumptions and try some things out, but they don't really they may not know what they're doing, and B, after we set it, forget it, then life happens, right?
Totally.
Yeah. I mean, I'm far from a Microsoft expert, obviously, but I think I would have assumed if it came with all these jazzy security tools that they would be like kind of like out of the box on. So just hearing that that's not the case and that you actually have to go in and like turn things on is news to me and interesting and surprising. So, Adam, over your career, how often did issues start to come up from things that no one really realized had changed, like on the back end?
I mean, I think it happens pretty regularly, right? Like, people don't necessarily they don't necessarily notice what's happening on the back end. It tends to be kind of a list of repeat offenders too, right? Like, doesn't really matter the industry or like the size of the company necessarily. Tend to see a lot of the same problems kind of over and over and over again. And you get things like, SharePoint is too permissive, things are wide open. You have people excluded from MFA policies. There's tons of guest accounts with no governance. It's a lot of, just mailbox forwarding is wide open. You just kind of see the same things sort of over and over again.
Basically, that's a little bit of that set it and forget it mindset. And so why is it easy to configure Microsoft 365 once, but so hard to keep it aligned over time?
I think a lot of it has to do with it sort of being like, the people that are on, that are tasked with maintaining the environment. It's when things need to change, it's always, we're going to take the path of least resistance, right? Like, one of the examples we always use is, maybe you have a VIP that's traveling and, you have somebody that's on the help desk, they get called up, they're in a panic because, oh my gosh, this really important person, they can't access anything. They're on a different, in a different time zone and they need it right now. And it's like, okay, the first thing it's yes, I'll fix this for you. No problem. And I'll do it quickly. And sometimes the quickest way to do it is, you relax the security policy. You might not necessarily be going through the right channels with like change control and those kinds of things. Cause hey, I want to keep my job. I got to get, make this guy happy. And you go in and you change the setting and it works and it's great. And then you don't want them bugging you again. So you don't need to bother going back and turning it back on, or you forget to go back and turn it back on. And we kind of see that kind of thing happen all the time. And, maybe in some cases it's the right thing to do, usually not, but it's the easy thing to do. It's the path of least resistance. And, over time, those misconfigurations tend to stack up and, you kind of lose track of them. And so it just becomes difficult to maintain.
Yeah, it makes me think too. This is kind of a little bit of a side, but, when I guess I drank the 365 Kool-Aid, if you will, because a while back, like the antivirus industry was created because Microsoft was vulnerable to all these viruses. So you get Symantec and all these products came out, and it hasn't really been until recently that Microsoft has a really good, solid infrastructure from end to end. But I'd also, like you said, that doesn't come out of the box necessarily. And I know that our team here at iuvo has really helped me configure a number of really cool things, even just encrypting documents so that other, like the document's encrypted wherever it lives, for example, right? Or it's been useful. You discover, tell about this, VIP is traveling, but there's like, oh, I might need to share data with somebody and I want to send it to them. And I only want to send to that person because I find like, oh, send something to them. And then they'll go, well, I opened it, but my Fred couldn't open it. And like, well, right. I didn't send to Fred. And like, does Fred need to open this? Yeah.
Right.
That stuff was never possible before, but it's within this whole, it points out to me that the complexity of all these things that can happen and then also can change. Sure. And people, like you said, this poor, IT person's, at 2 a.m, talking to their VIP in another time zones, trying to, and then they go back to sleep and maybe they forgot that they left this conditional access policy open or whatever, right?
They may have forgotten the whole thing ever even happened.
Yeah.
Especially if it's like wee hours of the morning. Adam, I want to back up for a second.
Yeah.
For people like myself, what even is a misconfiguration? Like when we talk about that, what are we talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's generally human error, right? Like it's not necessarily done maliciously, or maybe, it's even, done with good intentions. But, there's so many different knobs to turn and sliders to slide on, like you may not realize the implication of what's happening, right? There's nothing you turn a control on and there's nothing that's popping up in your face saying, hey, this is a massive security issue. So, in our example, require multi-factor authentication for every single person in the company, right? It's a standard thing that needs to happen. It's non-negotiable. But, somebody's getting some friction with that. You go in, you remove them from that policy, and, at first glance, not necessarily obvious that that's happened. There's not, in most cases, there's not, some alarm bell going off somewhere. And, that becomes a misconfiguration. I mean, and I'm sure we'll get to this, but like in the case for Guardian, you've got this configuration, you know, imprinted in your baseline. And, when you drift away from that, you're going to be alerted to it. And that right there is, technically a misconfiguration that has happened. And it's often, it's often human error, which is why it's great to automate this stuff and do things programmatically. Really helps to shine a light on some of that type of stuff, some of the human error.
Definitely. And that definition definitely helps clarify things on my end. Through working here, I've heard a lot about the amount of updates that can come through with Microsoft. Can you speak a little bit to those updates and how, even if you have a really well-managed environment, how they can impact negatively through these like quiet updates, the Microsoft environment?
When they're shipping a new feature or they're turning something new on, it's often not going to be set to the most secure setting by default, because it could cause some friction with end users. Like might be a disruption. They're just trying to get the feature out there, get people using it, get adoption widely. So it's not necessarily always the most secure setting when it's released. So those are things you try to you want to stay on top of and be able to monitor over time and track over time and sort of iterate with it where we have this new feature. It's an option. Maybe it's something that Microsoft adds to their secure score list. And if you're paying attention to that, you might notice that it has dropped, and but not necessarily, you're not checking that every day. It's not updating constantly. You're not getting an alert when that has changed necessarily. So having a way to kind of stay on top of that stuff and make sure you're following security best practices for even for new things that come out.
It sounds like even for teams that are very skilled, this would be like a full-time job just to try to keep up with these updates and making sure that they are aligned with whatever the company has decided is their best practice for security measures. So it sounds like it's very taxing on teams. Can you speak a little bit to periodic audits and why the periodic audits or one-time assessments are actually not going to solve the problems that we're talking about?
Oh, totally. I mean, yeah, one-time assessments, they're they're useful for you to kind of pass an audit right away, but just like we were talking about before, where things, it's ever evolving, right? You've got, multiple people with their hands in the environment making changes, people with all different sort of skill levels making changes. So, over time, it's very easy to fall out of compliance, even if you've painstakingly documented every setting that's supposed to be there. How do you spend the time and go back and actually, check each of those things? You're looking at a piece of paper. Okay, that's good. That's good. How often are you really going to do that? You might start with the best of intentions with that kind of thing, but it's not helpful unless it's an automated process. In the long term, it takes forever. People get busy. Maybe it's a New Year's resolution. We're gonna be the most secure, IT team in the land, and we've got this awesome document, and this is how it's gonna be, and it should never change. And okay, the first fire you got to put out, all that stuff goes out the window, and you forget to update your documentation and so on. So it can be a real challenge.
Yeah, and I would imagine hugely frustrating for teams that think they have this
Totally.
great foundation, and then
Totally.
it ends up falling apart inevitably.
Can I also maybe have you expand on? I know that we have customers in financial and regulated environments where they have to do periodic audits, and from my, I think the one-time audit versus the show me the history of everything that's happened, like how easy it is for, I say it because I know that talking to people in banks, like they dread these audits because it's a lot of work, and they're having to show the compliance not only now, but how long have they been compliant and so forth. So I know you've worked specifically with some of our clients on that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think that's one of the really awesome and kind of unexpected features. It wasn't something that we necessarily intended out of the gate with Guardian, but it's one of the features that sort of popped up that is really great, which is, you essentially have ongoing automated documentation of the system, right? Like you can export your baseline at any time and hand that document over to an auditor. That's super helpful. We've sort of made, Guardian's very DevOpsy in the background, right? So there's a lot of change control happening in the DevOps world, which, you don't really get the benefit of typically with configurations like Microsoft 365. But with Guardian, we sort of, unless you have a DevOps team, right, that's like really good at that, they know what they're looking at, they can manage the code, they can do all these things, they know how to operate in a DevOps environment. But with Guardian, you're just doing simple, approvals and denials of changes to the baseline. Those things are documented. You can export that documentation. So something really great to show auditors, and really into any industry where you're required to provide evidence of how you're meeting a best practice or how you're handling a certain control or something like that. And you can show, hey, this is when it changed, or we were alerted to this change, we reverted it back. This is what our agreed upon settings are, this is what our documented settings are. And all of that stuff is made a lot easier with the system, because you can just click a button and export it and say, here you go. You don't have to worry about that manual maintenance of your documentation for the system.
So Adam, you said that was almost accidental, like an accidental product of iuvo Guardian. So can you talk a little bit about how iuvo Guardian came to be and what the problem was you were trying to solve at first?
Yeah, I mean, initially the task was, hey, we're setting up a lot of tenants, we're onboarding people on a monthly basis. And in a lot of cases, these were new tenants. A lot of people migrating over from other platforms. But we really wanted to create a template that was secure and what we determined to be, our best practices at iuvo, which are derived from, multiple other frameworks. But we wanted to be able to repeatedly deploy Microsoft 365 tenants that had the best practices already implemented from the get-go. And so we did that through, a couple different technologies using Microsoft 365 desired state configuration, which is an open source project that's run by a bunch of Microsoft MVPs. It's a great project. We were building Graph API scripts for things that weren't necessarily supported in that. And we were successful in building a framework to be able to repeatedly deploy these tenants. But again, we fell into that same trap of, okay, it's set up now. A year later, we're looking at it and we're like, wow, half the stuff has been turned off or changed, or something new has been introduced, and hey, there's a better way of doing this now. And So, while we were keeping our baselines up, we wanted to be able to audit, hey, how has this changed over time between our initial deployment and now? And, so we were building these blueprints and we were kind of manually assessing it. And when we realized that's, hey, it's great to be able to deploy it this way, but it's even better to know when it's changed and,
Yeah.
what has changed. Um, and I think, it was sort of a light bulb moment of like, hey, we can use, a lot of the same technology, not only that we're deploying the stuff, but to actually monitor it. And we started getting some really good results from that.
It's been really fun to watch on the sidelines, even though there's plenty of it that I don't understand. In our company channels on Slack, when you're talking about all the updates and new features that it does, like it's just really cool to see how much it's evolved over time, and the benefit that it's bringing to clients, I think, is just really cool. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how iuvo's culture supported you being able to create something like iuvo Guardian. So like this idea of we can build something better.
You don't have to be afraid to fail. Brian's constantly encouraging you, please fail. Right? Like it's, it's we're empowered to experiment and to execute ideas. And, one of the big things is professional development, right? Like we always want to be, on the edge, on the cutting edge of technology, that requires tinkering and, significant amount of time playing around with stuff, reading documentation, doing research, hey, how can we, kind of like shoehorn this into an existing process or whatever. And like, it takes time and it might not always be the most fruitful thing. But, you're always learning. And I think the leadership here recognizes that, and not only do they recognize it, they encourage it. And I was super grateful. My favorite thing to do is to just play around with new stuff, right? Like I love to dive in, research, see what's new out there. Say, does this make my job easier, right? Does this make me in a good way a lazier admin, right? What can I automate here? Oh, hey, I got this new thing I can, and it's like that stuff's encouraged here, and it's fun. It makes the job more enjoyable when you get to play around with things that you like. And and then it may be successful, it may not be, but if it you always learn something. And yeah,
You're encouraged to try.
absolutely, 100%. Yeah,
I've never thought of it this way until hearing you talk about it. It feels creative. Like when I think creative, I think of like the arts in more of a traditional sense, but this feels like your version of like an art, to be able to kind of see a problem that exists and kind of tinker on the back end with technology to think about how you could create a solution, which is really neat. And I can see
no question.
feed your soul,
Yeah, I mean, this industry can get monotonous at times. It can, it can drone on a little bit. And when we have an awesome team here, and we tend to be very proactive. So we tend to not be putting out a lot of fires, right? And I think that gives us a lot of opportunity to have the time to do some of this cooler stuff and to explore and that kind of thing.
Well, I would say, like the momentum on this product is it started off kind of like, really, like I said, DevOpsy, and I've just seen it almost exponentially kind of improve over time. But I was thinking about this too, because you talked about like, in a good way, IT people want to be lazy. I mean, the essence is that you don't want to be doing non-value stuff, right? You want to be doing really kind of like interesting, forward-thinking stuff. And so it's when you're talking about the problems you were trying to solve earlier, and I think about like how the company has grown, and as far as like revenue and customers, with largely the same staff, like we're able to do the things that would take people a lot of time and not only just one time, but continually. And I think that's a model like who, as a, as a leader in the company, who wouldn't want that? And so, and the fact that you are, you recognize that early and you're like, let me give you some time to do this. And it's going to add so much value in the long run. I think I just love your mindset on that.
Yeah, and it sounds like some level of foundation needed to be established in order for you to have this like freedom and capacity. So, like this foundation of, like you said, being really proactive and not constantly putting out fires, that's a foundation that iuvo set. Brian, what would you say to leadership about like how did iuvo get here to a point where you could allow someone like Adam this level of freedom and creativity without fear of like, what is he actually doing with his time and what does that look like? Because like Adam said, it took time for him to be able to do this, and that does cost something to the company. So how does a leader balance that, and how do you prioritize that?
Well, I do say that uh, some of the things that other leaders may have struggled with is that hiring great people. And it's like everybody wants to hire great people, but you have to, well, you have to pay them what they're worth, for example, and you have to give them, if you hire really great people, you got to trust them. And I think there's a great level of trust here. And I've seen like, uh, as anyone know at iuvo knows that we don't really care about the time you put in. I mean, we want you to not be overworked, but we care about the results. So if you're going to spend time and on these things that we trust that you're going to be doing things that are going to advance you as a person, and then you're going to have ancillary benefits to the company. So I think as leaders, you have to kind of step back a little bit and say, do I trust these people to do what they what they think is best for the company or best for the customer or whatever, with the customer in mind? Really, it comes in the customer. In the end, it's what's best for the customer. And I think it's not always in your face. It's usually, for me, I don't know what's best for the customer, but Adam does. And so let Adam do he thinks is best for the customer. And then Adam and everyone else starts talking together and collaborating, and it becomes a really great thing. So I think as a leader is set the path and get out of the way.
Yeah.
So
Get out the way.
yeah.
I like that. So diving a little deeper into iuvo Guardian and some of the problems that it solves, Adam, can you speak a little bit to how having clear configuration baselines changes the way that teams manage Microsoft 365 in the long term?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you have a blueprint that, you know, that everybody can adhere to. It's, it's super important to be able to, establish a best practice and then, again, make sure you're following it, right? Which is kind of the whole crux of the product, which, you know, we have best practice analyzers that kind of help you level up, so to speak, to kind of get to a really secure place, if you're not there already. And, once you're there, you don't want to deviate from it. And so, having that, having that blueprint or that baseline that, everybody is, on the same page with.
Now, we've received a lot of positive feedback from clients that are using iuvo Guardian. Can you talk a little bit about what it means for teams to know that they're going to be alerted with context when something is changing in their environment? Like, what has that impact been like?
Yeah, I mean, it's been very good overall. I mean, you know, it tickles me to get feedback that, hey, I got, I got this alert. Yeah, I was told by one of our customers that the Guardian alert was his favorite email of the day to get. And I was
That's
like,
awesome.
great. I'm glad I could do that for you, right? But like, um, uh, yeah. So like, when it saves somebody's bacon, so to speak, it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's cool. It's rewarding.
It has to be stress reducing for these teams to feel like they have this like almost like extra set of eyes so that they can focus on other initiatives. Like that has to feel like a burden has been lifted for them in that way, because everything we talked about earlier in this conversation, just a guy was overwhelmed, just like thinking about trying to manage all of that and stay on top of it in a meaningful way. And so I think what iuvo Guardian is doing is just alleviating a lot of stress from these teams.
I will say, you said it's an important word to me, Jess, is context, because over the 30 some years of an IT, you get alert fatigue so often, because some of these products, they'll alert you at very micro little, and so this is like, here's an alert with some meaningful thing that's that for you, that will make you help you, versus going, people's pagers going off or whatever. I don't do they have pagers anymore, but like that type of concept. But having that context, going, this is very clear that this changed, and there's an impact to this.
Yeah, maybe you can speak a little bit to that, Adam. Like an alert from iuvo Guardian, like what does context mean? Like what are you getting in an alert that might be more beneficial than some of the pings that Brian was referencing?
Oh, yeah. Good question. So Guardian alerts will actually contain an AI summary of the alert, right? So this is all obviously on the back end handled in code, and code is, it's not the most human readable or digestible thing. So we have, we use AI to sort of interpret what that change is. It interprets what the security impact is, and it can, relay to the person receiving the alert, in much more relatable terms, like, hey, this changed, but this is the potential implication of this change, or like these are the details of the change, and in some cases, a suggestion about what, is this an appropriate change or not, or and then there's obviously severity scoring and things like that. So we can detect things that are like the most critical issues, like people getting excluded from MFA policies, for example, that kind of thing, or like opening up your SharePoint, like global sharing settings to anyone links and that kind of thing. Like, changes to those, sort of like top tier, very obvious security policies are going to come through with a higher severity and
Right.
Good information about what it is that changed and why.
Sure. So we've talked a little bit about how iuvo Guardian came to be. We've even talked about some of the newer features. Can you just give a high level explanation of what iuvo Guardian is today, February 2026, at the time of this recording? Because I'm sure by the time it's released, you'll have a new feature. It's constantly changing. But as of today, can you just give a high level like definition of what iuvo Guardian is?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So one of the newest features that we actually just released was what I was talking about before, which is some of the best practice analyzers. So we're aggregating several different compliance frameworks. So just the like taking specific settings and then mapping those to how aligned you are with a particular security framework. So we've incorporated the Microsoft Secure Score, first of all, which is super helpful. We've got the Intra ID Security Config Analyzer, the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark, CISA Scuba, NIST 853. So all of these things, if you want to opt into those, you can kind of see where your configuration is falling short, right? So that's going to really help you bring your baseline, sort of up to snuff with those frameworks, so that you are setting yourself in the most, setting yourself up the most secure way possible. So what you'll get when you log in, you get a dashboard. It tells you how aligned you are with those things that you've opted into. What your overall, MFA adoption is like across the board. You'll get right away the most important things that you're, like the most critical security misconfigurations you have for those frameworks that you opted into. That'll show up on the front page as, things that you need to remediate. It shows an overall Guardian Secure score, which is, like I said, it's an aggregate of all of those different frameworks and the Microsoft Secure score and your MFA adoption is kind of all bundled into one score. So you get a real good, point in time. You just take a quick glance and understand, how secure your tenant is. You get your drift management. So when something changes, you see all your alerts about what has changed. You have the ability to approve or deny those changes. If you approve the changes, they get written into the baseline. That all gets tracked, who approved it when, so you can actually go in and see a snapshot of the pull request, which is kind of the DevOpsy piece, but it's not something you have to worry about being a DevOps engineer to do necessarily. So you get the benefit of being able to see that stuff. And it creates that audit trail of who approved this change and when. When you deny a change, it throws a critical. You configure it to send an alert to your ticketing system. With this changed. This changed. We need to go set it back, kind of thing. It'll tell you what what you need to set it back as. You have your ability to, as I was mentioning, export your baseline configuration, which is great for auditors.
Yeah.
You have, there's a lot, of different features. Yeah.
But that compliance piece, I think, has also been a real winner to make that compliance audit so much easier, to be able to just get a report so easily that you can feel really confident has tracked all of these changes, who made them and when, and basically just proving to an auditor that you are following best practices and that you are secure by just printing out a report is, I think, a big game changer for a lot of businesses using iuvo Guardian now.
Yeah, without question, for sure. Yeah.
Now, iuvo Guardian does not automatically change settings. Why was that important in the design for iuvo Guardian?
We want, it's a security product. We want to give people as much confidence as we can to, to onboard the product, and it's read only. It does require a lot of permissions in the tenant, but they're read only permissions. So, there's no chance that you can go into Guardian and, do something that's going to adversely affect your tenant or, disrupt, your daily workflow. It's primarily a monitoring tool, and a change control tool. And, we didn't feel that we needed to, have it be anything more than that necessarily.
Well, I'll say, especially when we're talking to larger financial organizations, they certainly do not want a tool that's in there that's capable of doing massive changes, because then we become a vector. And I know that you've designed, this has been, I've been in design reviews with you all to talk about how secure and all the various levels that is built into iuvo Guardian. But certainly I think that's a significant element of the design, right? That we are there to make you more secure. We are not another attack vector.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's reducing the risk without adding more work to an IT team, which I think is really cool.
Absolutely. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, for sure.
Adam, is there anything that you think leaders maybe misunderstand about automation and security and governance tools?
Yeah,
and
I mean,
also pitch in as well.
Sorry?
I was just saying Brian can also pitch in as a leader if he has thoughts on this too.
Yeah, maybe he's the best one to ask. He's gonna have more insights to that than I am.
Well, I think that as a leader, I think you're always concerned. I think you want the security, you want for your business to be secure, you want to be applied to the governance, but there's a lot of work. and it usually requires an army of people to do this work. And so I think if you want to, I mean, many businesses have to meet governance of various standards, or they can't do business. Or and the smart ones say, well, maybe I don't need it, but it will help me. It'll help us be more secure and understand this. So, if you said, well, you could have governance, but you have to hire a small army of people, then I think the automation part of it for me, it would be a no brainer because I could get the best of both worlds. I could say, well, with a little bit of with the right product, the right person or whatever, my business can be, I know it's secure because it's meeting these standards and governments, and I don't have to incur that expense because frankly, maybe it's necessary, but maybe it's not.
So for one of my closing questions, I'm curious if there's anything that you wish leaders better understood, or maybe a takeaway from this conversation that you hope leaders get about Microsoft 365 risk and governance. What would that be?
Yeah, certainly that insight to, your Microsoft 365 security does not have to be, a mystery box. There is an automated way for, an IT department the size of one to, implement very popular security frameworks, to see where you stack up against those things, to implement change control, to run that environment in a very DevOpsy way that it does not require the skill of a DevOps engineer. So you get a lot of automation, you get a lot of monitoring, you get insights into best practices, and it all in one single pane of glass, and you don't have to have scores of people maintaining and maintaining documentation, maintaining doing manual audits of best practices and that kind of thing. You're not too far away from being able to have a very secure, a team that has like security down as a practice, right? Like that's not too far away.
Yeah, I want to riff on something you said there, and that is, you mentioned like if you're a team of one, and but this guardian can be for a team of 0, where you say, listen, I'm a business person. I just need to make sure it's secure. Then you have a team of 1. And what I find it particularly valuable is maybe a team of 15 or 20 IT people who may have privileges to make changes. And they may not know what their coworkers, like, maybe you're a multinational company or whatever, and you're people all across the globe. And one person, like says, making a change, I think it's the best practice. And this will alert everybody to these changes so that you can all coordinate in a better way. I think it's valuable too for a communication tool as well. So I think, I think there's advantage to each level of a company to know how to do this, I think.
Yeah, without question. I mean, one thing, another story that we can tell about this is, we have, several customers that, have global IT departments, right? There's people in the States and, Europe and, kind of all over the place. And, just like Brian was saying, you got these people in different time zones working on different things at different times, and they don't have the luxury necessary to ping somebody and be like, hey, I'm going to change this thing, or like, remind me to change it back tomorrow, right? Like that kind of thing. Where this is tracking those changes. But like, a lot of companies, they require change control, right? But that's just an operational thing. When you're kind of in the heat of battle, you're not always going to open a change ticket, right? It's not, like in some cases that's, I'm sure that's a fireable offense, but like, a lot of times, hey, our requirement for this is you got to make a change control request. Somebody has to approve it. You make the change. Then we have all that stuff being tracked. But like I said, when you're in the heat of battle, you're making these changes. You're not doing all that stuff. You're not waiting for all those things. You've got somebody reading it back. And an example of that, we have a customer that had a 99% intra ID secure score, like in Microsoft Secure Score. And it's like, okay, that's pretty doggone bulletproof. That's good. They're currently at 100. But so it can get better. But at this point they had a 99% secure score, and it was that exact scenario I was talking about, where somebody's out traveling, they need immediate access, they get relaxed from a risky user policy. Standard operating procedures, open change control request, that's going to flag somebody, say, hey, no, we're not excluding this person from that thing, we need to do it the right way, whatever. But this is somebody, they just made the change. Right. Literally within the next 48 hours, that account was breached by an adversary in the middle attack. The IT manager didn't know the change had been made. The people on the other side of the globe in the morning that woke up, they didn't know that configuration had changed. So like, hey, where did the breach come from? There's an amount of inherent communication that's happening in Guardian that, like Brian was saying, that might not necessarily be happening in real time. And then it, kind of holds you to that change control practice, and at least can give you the opportunity to have a conversation with somebody, like, right. Hey, maybe this is not the best idea, or like we really need to set this back right away, or you can find out who approved a change, that kind of thing, right? It's like exactly. And then you have that also opens up a security audit, and at the very least you have your security audit right there. This is what changed. This is how it happened. We've set it back. Here's the evidence, and and then you move on. But
no, it's a great example, Adam. I'm glad that you shared it. And I think that the other thing that makes me think of, depending on the business and what industry and the clients that they may or may not serve, I think that Guardian also offers a way to reinstill confidence.
Absolutely.
Because breaches do happen. Even like you said, they had like an almost immaculate secure score, and yet this still happened. And, being able to utilize a tool like Guardian, and then be able to show anyone involved, any stakeholders, any potential clients that may now have some issues with the fact that you had this breach, being able to reinstill that confidence that it is fully taken care of, I think is huge.
And to be clear, they were not a Guardian customer then, but they are now.
Right. And I will say that we, as a company, we get pulled into, often our first introduction with a company might be, we have lots of problems. We got, security problem XYZ, and we come in and we can do a big forensic analysis. But if you have a Guardian in there, the first place you can look is Guardian, and it's very simple, right? And then sometimes in that way, I'm happy as a CEO that Guardian kind of sells itself there. But even the process of digging down, I know you've been involved with some of these, Adam, is like to dig through an amazing amount of data to try to find what happened in a scenario like you just described. It can be time consuming, and you have and when you have this, it even cuts down the resolution time.
Yeah, and likely prevents it from happening because it was flagged in the first place and all of that, which is just really cool. Brian, if you don't have any additional questions for Adam, I'm going to volley off our non-technical last question for this session. So Adam, we asked this of all of our guests their first time on. I'd love for you to share a fun fact about you that might surprise people.
I think we saw my fun fact earlier with the. Yeah, we're gonna get real candid for a second and get a glimpse into my personal life. I have this foster dog is running around behind me. He was asleep and has decided to wake up and bite my feet and eat my plants. So one moment. I have a surprise appearance. That's Piglet. Hello. All right, you have to go in your crate. We're doing important business here. Yeah, we're my wife and I are very heavily involved in a local animal rescue, and we constantly have foster dogs in and out of our house. We spend a lot of our free time supporting that organization. My shirt here, this was one of our super senior foster dogs that we actually ended up adopting. She's since passed, so we've memorialized her on a sweatshirt. But
Can you plug that organization, Adam? I'd love for you to share, just in case anyone's curious.
Yeah, for sure. It's hopeanimals.org. It's a Hope Animal Rescue in Durham, North Carolina. Yeah, it's a foster based, totally 100% volunteer based. My wife is actually on the board. She does a lot more work with them than than I do. I just like pick up poop and play with puppies.
That is important.
So there, that's my fun fact.
Love it.
That's great, and I highly encourage people to go check that out. And
please do.
That you can support as well.
Yeah, or your own local rescue. Doesn't have to be that one. Really, any of them.
That's very true. That's very true. So, Adam, thank you so much for joining us. Today's conversation showed us that Microsoft 365 risk isn't just a technical problem. It's a leadership and a visibility problem as well. It also reminded us that some of the best solutions don't come from top-down mandates, but from teams that are empowered to step back, question, and create something better.
And if you want to know more about iuvo Guardian and how iuvo helps organizations bring visibility, structure, and confidence to Microsoft 365, visit iuvotech.com. You'll also find this episode along with all of our past and future conversations available there. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay curious.
We hope today's insights empower you to shape your future and rise to your full potential. Let's continue to grow, innovate, and lead, pushing the boundaries of excellence.